a very warm welcome to this rather wonderfully named session. I think big thank you to John and British Brands Group for the creativity here on Don't Panic. Although, as we know, the surest way to make sure people do panic is by saying don't panic. But I'm hoping that actually in this session, our panel members and some of the insights they're going to share will assuage any of those feelings of rising panic, and also offer some sage and also timely advice on this topic of brands in chaos or not. Maybe we'll come back to that in just a moment, and changing lives, changing behaviour, part 2. Now, I think on that changing behaviour, we can all pay our money and make our own interpretation about what we think are the best stats or the best descriptions. So we've had 6 years in 6 weeks or 10 years in 10 months. I mean, that sort of change inflation for you since the mad March days of last year. They've certainly changed and extended. But I'm rather thinking that no one on this call, nor indeed on the panel, need to have another sort of change, blah, 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 radical, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. We've all seen the presentations, we've read about it, and so on. You don't need another one of those homilies, but rather we want to get on with thinking about what's really going on and, frankly, what we can all do about it. And for that, I'm thrilled to introduce the panel that we have today. I'm going to be putting a series of questions to the panel in the first section, and then I'm going to be inviting questions from participants on this call. So please do think of your most difficult questions and then put those to one side and maybe ask some other ones. Ideally, these are on the way, but hopefully there'll be some stimulation as we go through. And please do, again, put them on the chat as and when invited. I'm also needing to say that the recording is going to be available later. And so now, please, to the panel. Well, I think the first person, I'll just say hello to Kerry Kavanagh, who is the Business Unit Director at Mars Wrigley. He's been at the organisation for over 7 years. And leads all of Mars Wrigley's brands in the UK. He started life like an awful lot of people who seem to be leading the universe at Procter & Gamble, where he looked after some of my favourite brands. Also, he did that via Eden's, maybe more about that in just a bit, which was a purpose-driven organisation. Again, more of that maybe later. Secondly, just to please introduce Richard Chatway, who's the CEO of BVA Nudge Unit. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist saying Nudge Unit, but I think we've all read the book. We know about the topics and everything else. And Richard's had a varied career in media and the COI, Department of Health, and so on, using behavioural science to solve business challenges. And I think, Richard, you do get the prize for the backdrop on LinkedIn on one of your recent presentations, and I think the title is Sciencing the SH*T out of communication. So I do hope we're not going to hear any more of that bad language, frankly, as we go through on the panel. Thirdly, I'd like to say hello to Amelia Harvey, who is the co-founder of The Collective. And you might see from her profile is actually Amelia's got some really great blue chip CPG experience, and her previous role was, I think we'd all agree, an envious one, or enviable one, actually, as sales director at Goo Chocolate Puds. I mean, what sort of fantasy is that? But she's now been at the Collective for over 10 years, creating the dairy of tomorrow from the ground up. And what I see actually from the website is that sometimes excludes that coming via a cow. I think that's true, isn't it? The dairy. So look forward to hearing a lot about that later. And our final guest panelist is James Parnham, who is head of planning at Mediacom UK, who's going to be overseeing the bigger picture vision at Mediacom, and previous roles have been overseeing Tesco and indeed winning lots of awards, which are too numerous to mention. I think actually you also were involved with the John Lewis partnership, John Lewis and Waitrose in previous life, James, if that's true. So maybe some conversations about that one later. But anyway, welcome to our panel. And if I can please then start with your opening gambits, if you like. If you could please say anything about yourself that is crucial to what you're doing at the moment that I didn't maybe raise in the opening remarks. And then please, if you could share your opening gambit about whether and what you've found in your respective businesses about this topic. So the supposed brands in chaos or radically changing lives. You may or may not agree with that premise. So what do you see really going on? And maybe I could come first, please, to Kerry on that one. Just your couple of minutes, please, of introduction. Kerry.
Great, thanks, Rita. It's great, first of all, to be with all of you. Really excited to be with this group and with this forum. So thanks, John, for the invite. The topic is a relevant one when you're at Mars Wrigley. There's always something that's brewing that, you know, in our case, next year, we're looking ahead to a very different category that we are going to, you know, delight and bring more smiles to our consumers. But we're going to have to do it in different ways. And so it's a very live conversation. We, at Mars Wrigley, I think we've had the benefit, and I feel certainly like I've got, you know, this amazing opportunity to continue to build some brands that are well entrenched here in the market. Consumers love our brands. It's really, it's a joy for me because I love brands, absolutely crazy about them. But also a responsibility because I do feel like we are constantly in need of evolving what the brands stand for and how we offer new solutions and new experiences and keeping the brands relevant. I think what we've seen time and again and hasn't changed is that in a world where there's still, as you walk into any store, 35,000, 40,000 choices, that there is still a desire to get the ones that you trust, particularly ones that you know either you've got incredible memories of, and so they bring you great joy, or they're great value. And in that regard, I think that hasn't changed, and that continues to feel quite steady as our opportunity. But we have to do that in different ways. And in particular, I have a feeling like we not just have to because consumers want it, but we need to. Yeah, there's so much we can do with our brands, and happy to talk about that, but we've got a lot of work to shift our brands and how we drive more purpose, make more of an impact into the supply chain that we have, into the sort of benefits that we bring to consumers' lives holistically. We have a great new maternal mental health launch on Maltesers, for example. So I find like the opportunities to continue to build trust and to strengthen that trust is really what the ask is.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think we'll talk a lot about purpose later, and also purpose, particularly in larger organizations. I think that's a really important and fundamental issue. If I can now please come to Richard. Richard, please, your opening remarks.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I would, you know, building on what Kerry said, I think that I would question, I guess, not the premise necessarily of what we're talking about today, but I think one of the assumptions that we might make from the premise, which is that as a result of everything that's happened over the last 18 months, that people have changed. Whereas fundamentally, I think the world has changed, and that's how we need to think about it. And in the work that we do at BVA Nudge Unit, you know, when I use that analogy of science seeing the SH*T out of communications, for example, people will recognise that's in part stolen from the movie The Martian, perhaps, and that's about applying best practice in science. And what we know from best practice in behavioural science is that you know, fundamentally the heuristics and biases that guide our behaviour are hardwired as a result of thousands of years of evolution. And what that means is that they don't change overnight. So the biases that guide our behaviour still exist. And to Kerry's point, you know, there's a lot of people who love the Mars Wrigley brands, and their associations with the Mars Wrigley brands, won't have changed overnight. But what has changed is the world we're living in, and our lives have been changed as a result of COVID-19 over the last 18 months to some degree. So, for example, one of the trends that we do a lot of work around is about increasing use of digital services and how we can drive adoption and usage of digital services and make sure that they are going with the grain of human behaviour to some degree, and recognising those biases. And there's been a slow increase over the last 10, 20 years of people using digital retail, digital banking, and so on. But that has been massively accelerated, as you said at the beginning, Rita. There's been change inflation in over the last year. So Salesforce data shows that in 2019, 43% of all customer interactions were happening online. In 2020, it was 64%. So in 1 year, that had grown by 50%, the proportion of digital interactions, customer interactions that are happening through digital channels. And so what that means is that, those brands that are well equipped to deal with that and have built great digital experiences for customers obviously stand to benefit. And, one only has to look at the massive increase in profitability of brands like Amazon, for example, over the last 18 months to see that. So, I guess my opening gambit would be to say, it would be a mistake to think that people have really changed fundamentally, but some of the circumstances, contextual, environmental factors that are a big influence on our behaviour have changed a lot over the last 18 months. And that's the way we should be viewing it.
Great, thank you. So human nature being what it is, but just on speed. This sort of, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. Some great insights already. And now can I turn to Amelia, please?
Yes, excuse me, thank you, Rita, and thank you, John, for inviting me, and lovely to be here today. Just picking up really, Rita, what you talked about our product range. So we're a dairy business, milk-based, been around, we're just about to celebrate our 10th birthday on Friday, launching in Sainsbury's and Tesco. So premium yogurts, and we had a plant launch in the planning for about 2 years before COVID. So throughout COVID, we were building a factory and then launched at Christmas time, so into lockdown. And I think some of the interesting reactions to that launch is A, launching innovation, which I know we're going to come on to talk about, and B, plant-based sustainable products and how consumers are reacting to those, because Veganuary was a lot less successful this year than it was in previous years for numerous reasons, which we can come into. So really looking forward to discussing more about sustainability and the way that consumers shop and what's on their hierarchy list now in terms of what they're looking for from brands. I think for us as an entrepreneurial business, and still growing in distribution, has been a really big step change and move to online shopping, and the emergence of, certainly around London, of all these like by the minute services that you can dial up, and it feels like the progression in technology has been huge, where you can instantly get products and consumer goods to your door really quickly. So it's seeing how that, whether it sticks, whether we're going to go back to old school, going into shops, and the on effect of really from being in an entrepreneurial business, what that means to innovation going forward as well, as to how do you launch innovation these days, and how do you link new ways of advertising through, whether it's TikTok. There's been some great examples of brands that have used that as a new channel to grow awareness and into sales, and how do you get brands in front of the consumer in this new digitally enhanced world that we're living in. So I guess my reflection of what I'm really looking forward to talking about is just how the medium of technology and innovation is going to settle down now that we're coming through the COVID period.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And also that new ways of advertising and connecting with people, it's a very good curtain raiser for our next panelist, James. But can I just ask you quickly, a slight vested interest here, but why was Veganuary less successful this year? Was it comfort needs, or what was it?
So I think as Kerry was talking about, with big brands and looking for comfort and looking for products that you're aware of and know, and big brands that have historically been in your fridge, if more consumers were shopping online, it's potentially easier to see the big brands, and the way that consumers were shopping as well was to either be in store and come in and come out very, very quickly and not browse. And I haven't got the stats to my fingertips, but more, there's probably more people eating bread again. The gluten-free category isn't in the same growth that it was. So there could be a mindset of, we're in the middle of this pandemic, just eat up and, stop thinking about sort of more faddy diets, and flexitarian, because flexitarian is such a big part of gluten-free and dairy-free. But there's so much to say that plant category and flexitarianism will start to grow again once we're coming out of this kind of comfort eating stage.
Right. I blame those elasticated trousers myself. I think it's given people the capacity for indulging. Thank you very much. And James, please.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you, John, for inviting me today, stepping in for Chris. Look, we all know the pandemic has been a massive forced experiment in human behaviour change, and some say it takes 30 days to form a new habit, and it's unfortunately been 18 months for many of us. So so change is potentially afoot. However, we know we all revert to type, and I think it's really hard when we're predicting about the future because we're in this position of transition, right? The pre and post vaccinated world. But Mediacom, I suppose we've been thinking about it in 3 ways. So bear with me on, I suppose, how we lay our future bets. So things that we're calling rocks. So those things are being brought about or accelerated by the pandemic. I think you mentioned it up front, but the rise in local, we're seeing the 80% increase in community conversations online. The stream culture, obviously, we've all seen the rapid growth of video on demand. But also in gaming, there are almost 9 million new mobile gamers on the back of the pandemic. As you mentioned, the world's become everything, obviously development of e-commerce, but even Ofcom tells us that we're spending 9 days extra a year online. So there's things that are accelerating, and I suppose have been really sped up because of the pandemic. Then there's things what we're calling badges. I think those things that have hibernated, that we've missed and we want to embrace again. And socializing is going to be a big one of those, for example. I think we'll replace sort of socializing with the sofa, to your point, you were talking about Amelia, but there have been 88 million more takeaways. We've all definitely embraced comfort eating to some degree. And we've been watching telly and massively consuming media at the same time. But as almost 2/3 of the way through the vaccination of all adults, at least with 1 dose, that, the return to socializing and how we live our lives and our media life is going to be really different again. And there's the third typology around icebergs. And I think there's some long-term changes that we as brands and as, planners need to really anticipate and future-proof against. So gender inequality is a big one for us from the perspective, where unfortunately 8 out of 10 jobs lost due to the pandemic have been for women. The most likely group to pick up unpaid work, childcare, elderly care duties, most likely to be furloughed. So the recession is here, particularly for gender inequality, and I think it's something we need to embrace. And there's also things like Generation COVID. So a lot have been talked about different groups, and every group has suffered to some degree. But actually, interestingly, I suppose the under 29s, almost a half of them are living back with their parents, which is a pretty depressing thought, but also most likely to be impacted by the economic downturn. And I suppose this coming of age over COVID, being anxious and insecure is gonna leave an imprint. And I suppose how brands work with this younger generation, or the inequality for women, is something that's really interesting for us. So less chaos, I think, but more rocks, badges, and icebergs.
Fantastic, really interesting and vivid insights there, and also I think some very sobering thoughts and stuff for us to think about as a society, and indeed brands and their role within that. So thank you very much for those opening thoughts. If I can now move to the things that we're all finding in our respective businesses that people really care about now. What are the real influences today on brand preferences and purchases? And obviously there's a broader social, socio-political climate, and with trends like populism and Brexit and wokeness and all those terms that are really, seem to be capturing the public imagination at the moment. Are some of those trends having a really greater impact now? And what's the evidence for that? And can I just come then to Richard? So what are the real influences? And the difference, I guess, between what people say and what they're actually doing on that, by the way. And what are those? What are they? What can we do about them?
Yeah, so I guess, so going back to what I was saying at the beginning, fundamentally, I think the drivers of human behaviour haven't changed. but the context and the environment and those external influences have changed as a result of COVID-19, and the fact that there has been, you know, huge changes and huge movements in wider society around issues like Black Lives Matter, for example, will be having an influence on people's behaviour externally as well, and we've certainly seen that. I think, you know, going back to the point I made earlier about, you know, the impact of COVID-19 and the increasing digitization of our interactions with brands and with companies, you know, and that 50% proportionate increase in 1 year is, you know, that means making those experiences good and easy for people is even more important. And that has been a fundamental driver throughout, is that the experiences and companies and brands that are easy to deal with and deliver services in an effective and efficient and easy way benefit from that. And Amazon is a great example. I would say a prime example, no pun intended. But you know, we're doing some work at the moment, for example, with a bank, with a major savings bank, and they've always had an initiative, and the initiative we're working on has been trying to encourage adoption and usage of their digital services for various reasons, and some of which are related to driving better customer experiences and some of which are efficiency based. But one thing that we've been doing, for example, is when people are calling the call center about and we're encouraging them to use these digital services instead for certain transactions. A lot of people will have innate barriers and habits and say, oh no, I'm not comfortable going online, it's not secure, it's, you know, I don't like doing it, particularly older customers. And one thing that we've done is we've adopted a coaching-based program. So basically they can coach people through the process on the phone. So the customer service advisor will have the website in front of them while the customer is on the site, and they'll help them navigate it through it. And the response to that has been absolutely fantastic, and customers love it, and they've been really positive about it and say, you've made it so much easier for us. And I think that's something, you know, that just goes to the fundamental drivers and what people do care about. The easier you can make things for people, the more likely they are to do it. And we care fundamentally about our lives being made easy, and we care about issues like sustainability, you know, social justice issues, but the easier they are for us to behave in ways that are consistent with those beliefs, the more likely we are to do them. You know, it's much easier now for people to be flexitarians, as Amelia says, because there are more flexitarian options in the supermarket. You know, 20 years ago, it just was much more difficult for people to adopt those lifestyle changes because there weren't as many options for us, and there weren't options for us. And
Thank you.
if you go out, to your point, Rita, about, you know, the difference between what people say and what they do, if you go out and ask people, do you think, you know, Black Lives Matter, sustainability, you know, gender equality, whatever the issues might be, are important issues, majority of people will say yes, of course they will. But then when it comes to something that requires additional effort, which requires additional cost, which requires some pain to them personally in order to put their money where their mouth is, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't willing to make that compromise. But the more we're seeing meat-free alternatives in supermarkets, the more we're seeing, you know, I've just bought an electric car for the first time, for example, and, you know, one of the big drivers for me to do that was the fact there's a charging station 100 yards from my house.
Yeah.
And I have a garage so I can plug in and charge overnight. Frankly, you know, I've wanted to buy an electric car for many years, but until that infrastructure was in place, the barriers were too great for me to do it. So, you know, those are the things that fundamentally still matter to people, and that's how we can drive effective change.
Really interesting, thank you. And I think that thing about making things easy, it's so easy to say and so difficult actually to do, isn't it? And I think some of the things we'll describe, like having a human coach to help you along the digital journey, that's not something those aren't dots that are often or have been enough joined up, I suppose, for so many organisations. And I think the thing about things do matter, but not enough to inconvenience people for the most part. And that's a really interesting insight. I think we'll come to the consumer and brand response to that in just a moment. If I can just ask James, you to comment on this briefly. We've highlighted some of the very vivid sort of issues and rocks and trends and so on. But in terms of your indications about real behaviour and how one can influence this real behaviour, and again, populism, Brexit, you know, all these things, do they really influence brand choice and preferences?
Look, that is a very tricky and loaded question. I think when you're talking about what matters to people, what they really care about, I think, I mean, it's an obvious one, but it depends who you're talking to, right? You know, when you look at advertising communication specifically, I think it's really, a massive driver of that is your age. So I don't know if you saw the GWI study from this year. It was a global study looking at different cohorts and what appeals them to advertising, what leaves an impression of them. And the younger you are tend to look for advertising to entertain your life, to give you laughter. And the older you get, it becomes a bit more functional with product information and discounts. And look, it's not as binary as this, but your age is a massive influence on who you are as a consumer and what you want out of advertising specifically. And clearly, brand marketing is much bigger than advertising, but definitely in my field, that's what we were focused on. I suppose for me, there's a slightly bigger question, and this is an interesting one, is has marketing and advertising lost its power of persuasion? I think if you've read Orlando Wood's Lemon, he would suggest we've moved from a period, a golden period of advertising, and that ability to entertain and emote has been replaced by relatively abstract and 2D advertising. If you speak to Bennett and Phil, they'd say that's driven by quite short-term tactics by marketeers, focusing less on the long term. If you speak to Google, they will talk about their messy middle, and that's about between the sort of the trigger and the purchase, and obviously the explosion of the internet has really made that choice that to your point, Richard, about thinking about electric car, researching it, exploring it, maybe evaluating it against different car advertisers and options out there. So there's lots of things at play here. I think age is a big factor, and I think actually has advertising itself become a weaker, even weaker force, as it has always been known as, than it has in previous years.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, but actually if Kerry and Amelia would like to just pick up on some of these, because I guess this next question is related to some of the more sort of broader socio-political trends. I mean, we're all seeking clearly a more just and sustainable future for the planet, and also for the planet and society. Are we now moving? Are we in an era of business moving really from damage limitation to delivering net positive, i.e. not just minimizing the damage that we're doing, but actually moving to a stage where every business will be seeking to leave a net positive impact? And can brands accelerate that? And actually, is there greater pressure to change from consumers, again, on the difference between what people say and what they're actually doing in behaviour terms? Or otherwise, actually, is some of the greater pressure now coming from investors? So maybe, Amelia, I'll come to you first and then to Kerry, if I may, because I guess that's what your business is all about, this, isn't it? Yeah,
and in the last 4 years, this has really accelerated for us, and the B Corp movement has been the catalyst for that. So B Corp this year, the number of businesses I'm now seeing that are becoming B Corps has been phenomenal. It's B Corp month in February or March, and just seeing the number of businesses that are now becoming accredited. So with B Corp, we've been on that journey for about 2 years. We were accredited about 6 months ago, so during the pandemic. And for those of you who don't know B Corp, definitely have a look at it. It's about a business being a force for good. It kind of pulls up your carbon on your engine of your business across all areas, from sustainable practices, carbon footprint, employee practices, volunteering, your impact in the community that you operate within. So it's a really big look at the business from kind of underneath the surface of it. And I think with B Corp, and I know there's some members of the Tesco team on the call today, with B Corp, Tesco's reaction was very, very positive when we were on the journey and accredited. But the most interesting remark really from the buying team was that could be in 3 or 4 years' time an actual prerequisite to trade with Tesco. So I think businesses will become more and more sustainable. It's driven by consumers wanting to see businesses to be sustainable. I don't think it's the number one on the hierarchy of the choice of why consumers would choose a brand, but I guess if there were 2 different brands and one was sustainable and one wasn't, then that would probably have the edge. I think the pressure will come from the retailers in terms of how much they'll push and change the agenda. I think with Tesco, they're doing so much behind the scenes and beginning to see lots of noise on some of the digital advertising they're doing, telling stories of some of the sustainable practices they're putting into place. But they've made huge waves on plastic, on sugar, on recyclable materials, and they are black and white about it. So we've had to take black lids, even though they were injected with green dye and could be recyclable. We've changed all of our lids so that we're now applicable to trade within Tesco. So I think it's going to be consumers pulling that agenda, and then it's also going to be retailers demanding that from brands and demanding the change and pushing that change through, because they can have probably the biggest impact on whether it's sugar, whether it's products being placed in front of children. They can make big waves and make things happen. I think Tesco's leading that charge.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Kerry, can I come to you on what your view about this is? I guess the gap and also the net positive, how brands can accelerate all of this, and where's the pressure for change coming from, and so therefore what can we best respond to and lead?
I think a number of things Amelia said I would agree with strongly. So, in regards to where does the change come from at the moment, I think, at the end of the day, we're a consumer, brands are consumer products business in my case. So if the consumer doesn't choose to buy us, all things fall over from there. And I think therefore our investor candidly is the consumer wanting us. And there is a group of consumers who truly will make choices off of, some of these higher order, more, charitable desires for benefits. But the truth is that time and again, there's more of a self-interest, candidly. And I think it might be hard for us to hear that, but there was a recent conversation that we had with the chief marketing officer at MasterCard, and he had said over the years, MasterCard's done a lot of studies about, consumer interest, and every time greed beats philanthropy, every time. And so I actually think that it's a question of more what we as companies believe is the right thing to do. Because actually, I'm not sure that we have to do some of this. I really credit Tesco. I do think they have moved the needle in a big way on packaging. But let's be honest, they've taken a choice themselves to do that, and that's had a really positive ripple effect. And I think, therefore, the net benefits of companies like B Corp, which is amazing. In our case, we use what we talk about at Mars as a private company is, the future we want tomorrow starts with the business that we make today. That's our purpose as a company. Our focus is on mutuality. We call it the economics of mutuality, and it's much more of a stakeholder mindset, not a shareholder mindset. But ultimately, our net benefit comes from us taking a choice to have all of M&M's wind powered here in the UK, to have 70% of total Mars energy usage in the UK from sustainable sources. On Galaxy, 10% of our profit goes back into the communities that we, in fact, source from. We've started microloan programs for women there and invest in the schools there. And I think these sorts of choices are new and emerging, and we're only starting to talk to consumers about them. But it starts from, I think, our companies deciding, each of us, to take that step because we feel it's the right thing to do. Not necessarily, I don't feel at all times the pressure from consumers, if I'm really honest. Do I hear it? I hear it. Do I really think that we need to do it and the business would fall over? No. But I really admire folks like Amelia who've done B Corp, Tesco, who's pushed us. They pushed us hard. They have. And I think at Mars, we've done some really good things in this space too, but it has to start from us wanting to do the right thing. And then, we can have a huge impact, a huge, huge impact.
It's a really interesting one, this, isn't it? Because I guess I've heard from many different quarters, if we wait for consumers to tell us to act, then, frankly, we're going to not have a planet that we'd really like to be on. So very interesting here about the stakeholder mindset rather than the shareholder mindset, and obviously lots of vocabulary around, a lot of examples and discussions around this. I guess it's where the rubber hits the road. And Kerry or Amelia, are there any examples that you could use where actually you've made a different decision? And I think actually there's a role, isn't there, for all of us to, take up this challenge about business leadership, visionary business leadership, where actually, as you say, there's, we need to step up and help make these things happen because it's the right thing to do rather than because the research tells us. And it's as much a B2B and an investor pressure as it is actually a consumer pressure these days. So, Kerry, are there any example, and Amelia, where actually you've made different choices because of these drives as an organisation?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it. We've changed our lids. Our lids are very recognisable, being black lids. It's our brand identity. We've changed it from black to then we were one of the first people to use green injectable dye into the lids. But in some cases, some recycling centres don't pick up the green dye. To then being really brave a few weeks ago and then putting clear lids on the top of our pots. And we haven't got any sales data to say yet whether that's going to be positive or negative, but it's a big, bold step, and it still feels quite a bit of a sharp intake of breath seeing it on shelf. But it's then also allowing us to tell a really nice story under the clear lid of why we've done it, and then have very, very colourful stories on the lids on the yogurt. So that has been a major change, changing something that was our true brand identity.
The symbolic lid. The symbolic lid, yeah.
Sadly, we never get the collective recalled as a brand name. It's always the yogurt with the black lid and the cow's head. So it's pretty major to take the black lid off.
Thank you. And Kerry, any sort of examples of other choices that as a corporate, that maybe a principle isn't a principle until it costs more money, as sometimes people say.
Yeah, we have had, I think, not talking about packaging, because I think there are some really good examples there. The Maltesers has been for us one of our big launches this year into purpose. We in January, working with Comic Relief, launched a new focus on maternal mental health, and we've got a very successful long-running campaign, Look on the Lighter Side, with Maltesers. It works brilliantly. Consumers love it. Just YouGov just said we're the favorite confection brand in the UK, so thrilled about that. And there's no reason to change, if I'm honest. But in fact, we felt like it was the right thing to do to help women who go through maternal mental health. It's a topic actually that affects nearly 7 in 10 women who it affects don't feel they can talk about it. They feel like they're the only ones who do it. And just since launching the campaign, we've shifted a lot of money that, to use classic marketing terms, would have been just working money into not working, because we got to shoot new assets. We've got to put money into places that actually we didn't need to. We felt like it was the right thing to do for our message to come through. So we've had over 75,000 people click through to our Comic Relief sites. We've had hundreds of women who've actually reached out and gotten help. And we've seen, I think, just a really positive response. So this is us trying to make an impact that complements what I think the industry has done on packaging. So there are, in my view, there's a lot of different lanes that people are trying to take choices, but some are baby steps, but at least they're there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great stuff. I'm going to move now on to the question, which is about how powerful, in your view, and I'm just going to come to James first and then Richard, can brands and social media be in nudging people to make better choices for this future that we're wanting? So the just and sustainable future, or indeed just, I guess, benefits to society. How powerful, in your view, can brands be? How powerful is social media within that mix to make those things happen too? James, can I come to you first?
Yeah, of course. Great question. I mean, look, brands can definitely have a credible role in helping here. They can help you eat better, buy better, travel better, all the kind of UN sort of agents of change, protect nature, waste less, packaging. And you're starting to see some really good examples. IKEA, obviously this year, Fortune favours the frugal. Promoting not just kind of new products like bamboo straws, sure, not hugely commercially valuable to them. Ultimately, new behaviours. Obviously, you've seen the news about obviously buying and returning recycling furniture. So obviously, both are required for a sustainable future. Tesco, Amelia, obviously just talked through. Obviously, a client I run here at MediaCom, but they're surfacing lots of their little helps. Electric charging in car parks, zero food waste commitments, local community matters, partnerships with Trussell Trust. So doing loads in that space here, and definitely a leading voice, I'd say. But lots of those little steps that are sort of adding up to one bigger vision. Obviously, and you probably saw as well, Selfridges and Project Earth from last year, which is a long-term commitment to sustainable shopping. And quite interestingly, from a media point of view, they use a sustainable media plan. So they try to have a much lower carbon footprint. And I think you'll see more and more brands not only just managing the carbon footprint within the business, but obviously within their partners and obviously their plans and communications. So I think increasingly that'll be a big part of it. So clearly these brands have got their house in order, and any sense of purpose needs to come from a field of specialism. Specifically on your question on social media, I think it's an interesting one, because when you look at things like Edelman's trust barometer, it's social media isn't the most trusted channels to place your messages. You know, traditional media, and it sounds a bit Luddite and it feels a bit archaic, but TV, print, out of home, these are your most trusted mediums. So if you're talking about sustainable messages and trying to make change, then that probably isn't the first place I would play. Clearly, it can help with nudging, but I would maybe argue there are different ways that brands can start nudging. You know, things like carbon footprint on, you know, sort of outlining their carbon footprint on packaging. Obviously, Oatly do this. I know Unilever are committed to doing this on lots of their products as well. So I think channel selection, you know, before you get to paid for media, it has to be internal. Would be my first piece. And I think if you are going to go broadcast with it, it isn't necessarily going to be social, personally.
And having said that, do you have any favourite sort of social media wins that you feel actually, despite the fact that there might have been more effective or high profile ways of doing that, do you have any particular favourites?
Well, I think the one
that have used social media to sort of start a different sort of revolution.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, obviously Black Lives Matters was mentioned earlier by Richard. I think, you know, obviously there was a Blackout Tuesday, obviously lots of brands coming together on social to obviously show their support for the movement, obviously you know, blacking out their social profiles. Some brands came off altogether, you know, particularly in rejection of how Facebook approach these things. So look, you know, that ability to make change on social media is always there. That was quite an extraordinary moment in time. And don't get me wrong, social media has that power to do that, but more driven by the consumer than from brands. I think sometimes when the brands are leading that conversation, it's going to fall slightly on deaf ears. That was very much brands falling and working with consumers as opposed to leading the debate. So is it possible? Yeah. And I think obviously what we saw last summer is obviously extraordinary.
Thank you very much. And Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with James on that, and I think you know, if I can get a crowbar in, a shameless plug for my book, The Behaviour Business, that came out last year. There's an example I use in there, which is from a campaign I worked on with Australian federal government, which was a wholly social media based campaign called XTL, which was about promoting or it was about encouraging respectful relationship behaviours amongst teenagers. And that was you know, one of the reasons that was so successful was because it was the perfect channel for calling out those behaviours. And to James's point, it was very much organic in terms of, you know, we were encouraging teenagers to adopt the desired behaviour, which was to use this hashtag to call out disrespectful behaviour online. So whether that was trolling behaviour or whether that was people sharing photos or videos without consent, those kind of behaviours. And one, because of the audience, being teenagers who are obviously extremely active on social media generally, and two, because the nature of the behaviour we were trying to address was happening within that medium, it's the perfect vehicle for it. So I think to James's point, and he touched on this a bit earlier as well, it depends on the specific behaviours you're trying to promote and the nature of the audience as to whether social is the right channel for that. I think it's very easy, particularly for those of us who work in a kind of marketing communications world, to get a bit carried away around the influence and impact of social media. You know, Twitter is not the whole world. Twitter is a microcosm of a particular type of.
Thank God, yes.
Yeah, well, quite, yes. I wouldn't want to live in that world. I'm not sure about you, but yeah, it's not with it. So, you know, the mental availability in behavioural terms of certain issues is much higher if we've seen, you know, it trending within social media than actually how it might appear in the wider world. So, you know, and dare I say it, with certain issues, and we've talked about, for example, Black Lives Matter, you know, the both sides of that debate, if you want to call it that, are amplified within social media. In the wider world, that's not necessarily reflective of that. You know, for a lot of people, it's an issue that isn't quite as polarizing, and potentially actually for a lot of people it's an issue that they haven't really thought about, to be honest.
So choose your issue, and then of course choose your channel. It might sound obvious, but sometimes in the kind of over enthusiasm, Twitter is not the whole world.
And I think that yes, and absolutely. And I think the other point I would make on that is obviously it's important for any brands that do engage in these kind of issues that they walk the walk as well. You know, obviously the potential downsides if you're not,
absolutely,
for example, you're not practicing what you preach in terms of diversity and inclusion is very high.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just one question warning is just if there are any questions from the participants on this call, please do put it in the chat and then we'll pick them up later. So do pop them in, otherwise we'll keep on talking. Next question is about the innovation thing. Obviously, innovation is always going to be crucially important. What are the new challenges in our panel's view? And I'm going to come to you, Kerry, first. What are the new challenges that you found, particularly over the last year, to bring innovation to market at the moment and also in the foreseeable future? And how can this be overcome? How have you managed to overcome that innovation challenge, making it happen?
On the last year, innovation was uniquely different. Hard to beat toilet roll in the last year. You couldn't get any space in store. I think the last year is particularly a unique set of circumstances, but it has probably gotten our customers to hone in on like what are their best sellers truly. You know, how are they most efficient, and therefore if we're coming with new innovation, what does it bring to the category? And I think they learned so much last year about the assortments that they need to have, not just that they might have had. And so it's been for us, I think, a real re-engagement with customers about every part of our portfolio, especially the new innovation that we're launching. You know, my personal view is that there's still in consumer products, the lifeblood of our brands is still, though, looking ahead, what are the trends that matter and ensuring that we have innovation going there. I mean, one of the trends that we see is, you know, healthier treats and snacks, no surprise. So, you know, to have this year, we've launched 100 kcal, all of our favorite brands in under 100 kcal portions. We've had a Mars and Snickers with protein. We've got gum, which is already, an unbelievable category, HFS compliant, and a lot we can do with it. But actually, there's still some parts that we haven't totally done enough with. And so we can offer innovation to make that in a more attractive category. So we see it ultimately as trend-led. You have to convince the customers that there's a space due to that trend long-term that's worth them starting and investing in. And then I think there is always, of course, we can say all that as a big company, there's just amazing in this space. There's just amazing brands coming in all the time. And I think one of the things that we obviously are challenged with is at a consumer products company of our size, we've got unbelievable brands, but sometimes new brands are quite challenging in consumers. Do they need a new brand? Can we bring it under the core, the big brand? What's the trade-off, right and wrong with that? So, these are live conversations for sure that many of us probably go through, because consumers want brands and they like new. It's just part of, I think, what they shop for. And so, yeah, innovation certainly plays a role because shoppers are walking in the door looking for something new to try. They're always trying to treat and snack healthier and have new things as part of their lives. So I think it's just being more choiceful because customers are being more choiceful about what they'll put on their shelves.
In terms of how you decide between, launching something new under an existing brand platform versus innovation and new introductions, what are the key criteria, and have they changed at all over the last year, 18 months?
I think that what has changed a lot is probably some of our route to market choices. And there's been a formula for consumer products for a long time, which was once it's ready, just put it everywhere, get the distribution, turn on the big reach advertising, and it'll work. In happy days, you can get probably 2 years of sales off of it. But increasingly, I think what you start to see with emerging brands is that they've been smarter. I mean, credit to Amelia, to go to 10 years in this, that's amazing. Like that's amazing. And that speaks volumes to coming through and evidence that there's different ways to build brands and to build innovation. And I think that's, companies our size, we're learning that. So it's actually our advantage is we can walk in and we can get that distribution right away. So should we? I don't know. Now we've got new channels. If we bring it through digital, what's the difference there? If we bring it through one customer and get them to set it up right. So a lot of our conversations tend to not be so much on the brands. And if we do the brands, a lot of it is about route to market and how do we learn where to put it and then how to communicate it through new channels and new yeah, new content, new social, new influencers, just so many more options to build I'll call it that first 14% of penetration. Yeah, so that's the hardest to get. Nearly all of our brands.
The magic first 14%. Is that, yes? The magic first.
Yeah, the first 14% of penetration is very difficult. Very, very difficult.
Thank you very much. It was a great curtain raiser then to Amelia. I think that was some great compliments you were being paid on that.
See the bags under my eyes from 10 years ago.
It must be all that fantastic dairy that's making you look much younger. So anyway, if you could please just talk about the challenges of innovation at the moment and bring it to market in the current, in the current circumstances, all those things.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is the way that retailers have range rationalised over the last year and really focused on the big sellers, mainly in response to their models changing and the stores becoming almost picking, for those that haven't got Ocado warehouses, they become picking slots in store. So you've got all the online shopping growth all being picked from stores. So it's much more efficient for the retailers to have fewer lines and then more stocking, more kind of availability of the lines that are selling the most. So it's really forced us to look at our tail and to really push the big sellers on flavours amongst the ranges. So innovation has been challenging because there haven't been as many opportunities and as many shelf opportunities with less SKU slots on shelf to launch innovation. But I completely agree. I think consumers crave it. They want newness. Retailers love launching new products. I'd say that the time period to prove success of innovation is becoming shorter and shorter. Brands can go in and have probably less than 12 weeks to prove a point, and then they're in or out. And then we've really had to look at the way that we support our innovation. So with the plant launch, we would normally support that with a lot of in-store tasting, because once tried, hopefully conversion into purchase. So we took advantage of lots of people enjoying takeaways at home, and we partnered with Deliveroo and Uber Eats to put our plant launch out there with other vegetarian or vegan deliveries. So we've had to really pivot and think about different ways to get the products in front of the consumer and to taste. And then looking again at new routes, new link ups, new digital ways of getting the product in front of consumers as well. So I guess with our size and ability to pivot and be agile, we're able to take advantage of test and learn and trying new ways of getting products in front of consumers, but definitely looking forward to having that interaction face to face with consumers again, either at trade shows or exhibitions or festivals. It just seems a million miles away since we were doing all of that. So it's going to be great to get back and have that consumer feedback and interaction to really know, because it's always been a bit of our finger on the pulse of having those conversations with consumers when we're trialing and sampling products, to really hear back from them of what they're looking for and what's important for them at the moment.
Fantastic.
So that touch point.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think there's a lot of pent-up hugs, aren't there, at the moment, that we're all feeling. So right, I'm going to move to the penultimate question, and maybe just ask Richard and James to prepare their comments on what's the final piece of advice to brand owners and advisors in these slightly strange times. But just before we do that, we touched on purpose, and we've touched on community connections and trends and so on before. But can I just very quickly ask Amelia and then Kerry about, is it really true that brands with purpose are becoming more important to all stakeholders, and how is that really working? And on the size and the inverse relationship sometimes that people can feel about authenticity, i.e. big companies bad, small companies good, is that true, and how does one get on top of that? I know, Kerry, you've highlighted one or two examples there, but Amelia, from your point of view, how do we best go about this purpose thing, and what's it doing really?
I think purpose is a great guide and North Star internally to drive the teams behind a common purpose for where the brand's going. And that purpose may not be consumer front facing, but it galvanizes the whole team towards where the business is going. And our purpose is eat better, do better. So it's all about great taste, but also about doing good amongst sustainability and B Corp. So I think it galvanizes the team. Then the team are all rowing the same direction and talking about the purpose that they want to drive the brand forward. And then that will spill into different campaigns. So I think internally, and having that guidance when building a brand is really, really important. On your second point about authenticity and size, and we talked on a pre-call about this before, we've always had a tone of voice, which is us or me or on social media, of where we've been able to be authentic, because there was only 10 years ago 2 of us sitting in a room talking to customers, and it was our tone of voice. But I think what's been really interesting is seeing bigger brands that have embraced empowering their team to talk on behalf of that brand, and thinking about M&S and Aldi wrangle over Colin the Caterpillar, just how clever the Aldi team were, and having an authentic taste and a tone of voice, and empowering the team to have that voice of the brand, because you can be really, as a big brand, you can be really nervous about what's going to go out there and have legal got sign off of it. But if brands can empower their teams to talk on behalf of the brand, then that authenticity can flow through. We were talking before about banks and digital banks, and you feel like you're talking to like a real person that genuinely cares. So I think from a smaller brand, you do it naturally anyway, because it is your own tone of voice, and you're kind of in an office and hearing each other talk and talk to the consumer. But for bigger brands, those that are really embracing it and doing, having fantastic kind of cut through on social media, those that are empowering the team to go for it and react with an amazing tone of voice. So yeah, I believe bigger brands can do it, but it's about how the team is empowered.
I'm going to give Kerry just the option of, this is your 30-second challenge, Kerry. If you could possibly concertina your responses. I know you touched on it before, but what about the size thing? Is this a real problem? And then we'll end up with the final couple of sentences for everybody.
No, I don't think so. I really don't. I think there's amazing big businesses, there's amazing small businesses. Either you're good or you're bad. And I think that it starts in consumer products. Is, do you have a product that people want over and over? And if it's going to grow, then I think then it's about, do you have a culture that attracts people and is rewarding? And then all of a sudden you can grow more. And then I think today that the conversation's evolved, and I love it. Yeah, but what do you do with that responsibility? So with that, you have an unbelievable opportunity to have more of an impact, more scale, more. Is it just about making more money? Could be, and credit. There are a lot of companies that have a lot of success that way. That just doesn't happen to be my company, and that's one of the reasons I love working at Marsh. So, but let's not pretend. You need to have profit to have more purpose. Let's just be candid. That's part. If we're not charity, we've got to make money, and then with making money, we can actually do more with that. We can make choices around more sustainable energy, better packaging, better employee rights for diversity and inclusion. So we certainly want to make a profit, but we have to do that, we think, in a way that then contributes more to society.
Thank you. Very well said. Sometimes the purpose and profit thing can sit in separate camps, which is profit is oxygen, isn't it, for doing the things that we want to do. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Can I just then ask, I'm going to come to Richard, then James, then Amelia, then Kevin, your final remarks. Thank you so much. What an incredibly rich discussion. But actually, if you had your crystal ball, what's your final piece of advice to brand owners and advisors in these slightly strange times? 2 sentences, maybe, if I can dare you, Richard.
Okay. Well, if I can be cheeky and say 2 things, but 1 sentence for each, then the first one is that in terms of understanding of human behaviour, we've learned more in the last 50 years than the previous 5,000. So the science around that is relatively new, but we're living in a very changing world, as we've all touched on in different ways. So Amelia mentioned this, testing and learning is really critical to understand how to achieve behaviour change in a lasting, sustainable way. Second thing I would say is, going back to that point earlier, in terms of purpose, that it's really important for organisations, and again, Amelia and Kerry both touched on this, organisations for that to be consistent with that throughout the organisation and to walk the walk around it. And what we know from behaviour changes, for example, in issues like diversity and inclusion, is not sufficient just to run some diversity training and then assume the behaviour of the people in your organisation will change. You need to have the right tools in terms of de-biasing recruitment, encouraging and promoting inclusive behaviours within an organisation to actually deliver on that. And that's what I would say my advice would be.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James.
I'll keep it short. I think for us, I suppose thriving in chaos, you've got to really understand how you build your brand in a digital age. That means two things: hold on to what we know has built brands always, I suppose, embrace the new digital and the new acceleration that we're facing as well. So keep the old, but also embrace the new.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Amelia, 1 or 2 sentences?
Really get close to where your consumer is. How are they changing? Are they at home, in the office? What do they need? What's their latest requirements? How are they changing and moving and developing as we come out and through this COVID period? Stay close to your consumers and keep listening and watching and learning from them.
Fantastic, thank you. And Kerry, you're going to have the last word or so.
Pressure. Be at the end of the day, be desirable. Be desirable. It starts from being wanted, and when you're desirable in a way that you're the only ones who do what you do, you're going to have a lot of success. You're going to be able to grow, carve out a niche, and ultimately, I hope have a lot of impact on society by the choices that you take.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I mean, you talked about being desirable and wanted. I do hope that that people on this call have felt this has been a very desirable and wanted set of insights. I mean, thank you so much. What a great panel, really, really rich discussions. And I guess, you know, the world needs changing, business runs the world, so we need to change business, and that needs this kind of leadership and these kinds of insights and thinking. And I do hope, if nothing else, what's emerged from all of this is that actually we really shouldn't panic, and we probably shouldn't say don't panic with a capital D and a capital P, because actually there are ways through. So thank you hugely. Thanks for people for listening. Thank you to the British Brands Group, and above all, thank you hugely to the panel. Thank you and good night.